Next in.
Welcome to Next In. It is November 12th. So just the day after Veterans Day. So happy Veterans Day to anyone who served in our fine military yesterday, or happy Veterans Day yesterday. Thank you for your service. And so we're here to launch one of our November podcasts on product. We have Wendy-Lynn, who's going to come talk to us and basically solve the world's problems of product. That's why she's here. So I'm Taylor Duncan. I got Shane Chown, and of course we have Wendy-Lynn, who's going to be chatting with us everything there is to know about product. We're really excited to have her. Her background speaks for itself, and I'll let her kind of give a little bit about her background and what she's done. And then I get to start with some hard-hitting questions. So Wendy-Lynn, you take it away. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing currently, what you've done in the past, your roles in product, etc.
Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you, Taylor and Shane, for having me. This should be a fun conversation. So a little bit about me. Right now, I work on Google Ads. So you pull up your phone, you search for a restaurant near me. That's my team. We make that happen, improving the design, making sure that the algorithms in the back end do a better job of pairing people with businesses, advertisers that are appropriate to whatever the search is they're doing. I also had the pleasure while I was at Google of working on some major ads platforms that kind of run in the background. All the ads that show up and measuring those ads. So code that I worked on was in every single cell phone in the world. So that was kind of exciting. So nice big impact at Google. Before that, I was at Yelp. I managed a team that was focused on experimentation and behavioral analytics for all of Yelp. Spent some time at Amazon working on recommendations platforms, but I actually came into product by accident. I was working at a wine store, and the owner goes to me, "We have a one-page website. You're smart. You can turn it into an e-commerce site, right?" And so that started a near decade-long passion with trying to make a wine easier to buy online. It was a interesting challenge because it's a highly regulated industry. And so that meant every time I tried to do something, I had to deal with 50 different regulations in the US. Forget trying to send anything internationally. And I always used to say the entire time, people are like, "It's a big problem." I'm like, look, if I can figure this out, I can figure out just about any product problem.
Yeah, so that's actually a pretty typical, booze to product to Google. We see that path almost all the time. So again, that's what we love talking about product in these conversations. The people who listen to this, hopefully the 60 million or so roughly, to get their start in product, to see where they're headed. And a lot of them are like, how do I get into product? And I think they believe there's a specific path you have to take. But clearly that's not the case, right? It is in many cases almost an accident how it all works out and how you get your foot in the door in product and how you continue to grow, so on and so forth. We're going to come back to that, but we need to start with more fun questions about you. All right. So what is a very fun, unique fact about yourself?
Fun, unique fact. I'm so blatant about my sports activities that that's not really kind of a fun fact. All you have to do is Google me and you'll find my triathlon results. So I would say,
all right. So
I would
she's
say
famous.
that I finished in the top 10 in one swim leg in one New York City triathlon. That's about as famous as I get.
Have you completed an Ironman?
Yes, Lake Placid Ironman.
Okay. Well, that would be, between you and I, we have completed an Ironman. So combined. So no, I have not, and I don't think I could ever do. Again, crazy to think that like a marathon isn't good enough. Then I need to do another marathon on a bicycle and then another marathon in the water. Is mind blowing to me. So that's amazing. So that is a very awesome fun fact. All right. So COVID has in many ways shut down travel, especially, vacation travel, stuff like that. It has changed how that looks. Let's imagine a world, we'll say in 2 weeks, where it all is gone and we get to travel wherever we want and not have to worry about regulations and COVID and everything else. Where would you go?
That's an interesting question. I've traveled a lot, lived in Africa, lived in Europe, spent time actually living and traveling throughout South America and Central America. So actually, in some ways, my selection might actually sound a little boring. I'd either want to go to Hawaii because I've never been, part of the U.S. I've never been to,
Oh, it's gorgeous.
or I'd go to there's parts of Africa I haven't been to yet that I desperately want to go to. So I lived on the East Coast. I really would like to see the West.
That's far less traveled, right? The west coast of Africa is far less traveled. So, no.
Well, I mean, Nigeria is one of the most populous countries in Africa. So
Yeah, I just don't think when I think of travel, I think South Africa or parts of Northern Africa, Egypt and stuff like that, I guess.
Yeah.
Or, up
Just
more Northern Africa.
Just sounds like she has a bias to the east. Hawaii to the west.
Okay.
Well,
by the way, Hawaii is an amazing place, and I was not excited to go because I was like, it's the U.S. Like whatever, it's Hawaii. Hawaii is unbelievable. It's gorgeous. It's awesome. It is a fantastic place to go, and I can't wait for COVID to end, and you can just head to Hawaii without thinking twice because Hawaii is amazing. All right, so the most important question where you will be judged by far the most on favorite movie.
Favorite movie? That's a really, really tough one. Star Wars when I was a kid, the whole trilogy.
Okay.
Don't make me
Is it
pick one.
easy,
But that's
safe?
the original.
Very, very safe answer. I can appreciate that. Shane, have you seen Star Wars?
I've seen Star Wars.
Okay.
Got that one down.
All right, because most of the time Shane has not seen it, but he has seen typically the crappy movies that people have seen. What was it called? Reign of Terror? Reign of Fire?
Rain of Fire.
Reign of Fire. So I've never heard of it, but I guess that was a...
If it's a sci-fi film, I've probably seen it.
All right, so let's get into, again, more from a professional level, how you got into product and so on, what you're doing. What would you say is like, from a product standpoint, currently what you're doing, what would you say is like the biggest challenge that you face kind of in a daily challenge in product?
So daily challenges depend on where you're at. So when I was in the startup, challenge was very different than when I'm at something the size of Google. So Google, anything we do, especially since I'm on the core product of ads and search ads in particular, anything I do touches everybody across the world. And so if you go to release something, there's a lot of levels of checks. If we release something and it has a negative impact, the backlash could be huge. The trust in the platform and the brand could be impacted. So that means that every time I go to do something, launch a product, I can't just, let's go ahead and let's just try this out. I have to go through design reviews, PR, legal, sales, all kinds of different parties have to look at what we do. So even the smallest tweak has to go through a lot of layers of approvals because of the scale and impact of what I work on.
Well, yeah, Google is not a small company. And like you said, you make one small change and that could have massive implications, not just in San Francisco, not just, in the US, but worldwide and how people interact with Google and advertising Google and everything else. That's awesome. So now you're obviously in product, when you're looking at bringing people, if you could give almost advice from a more the interviewing standpoint, right? Like, so you're looking at building a product team. What do you look for in people in product, right? Because they come from all walks of life. They're not all just engineering undergrad, then I got my MBA. Obviously you've done well, and I think do you have your MBA from Wharton?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So you have, that's obviously a big name school. Is that something that you look for as people who have that MBA from, some of the top schools in the country? Or are you like, no, I really don't care. I want to see what they've done in their past, or they need to have a strong technical background? Or what is it that you think really helps people stand out in product?
Again, the answer is going to be, it depends on the company, the culture, and the team. So for example, if you talk about big company, Google, I know Facebook is similar. The first level is they have to get through this product case interview. And so there's a certain level, a bar that they have to meet before they would even come to a hiring manager. So when I think about when I'm interviewing for Google on that first level, where I'm part of the team that goes and interviews people several a week, what we're looking for is in a product case. If I give you a product case and ask you, for example, design an app to find doctors, I expect you to have a product mindset. And I don't care. Actually, I don't even look at your resume. I do so many of these, I don't have time to look at all the resumes. The first time I interviewed at Google, and the guy said, "Well, I haven't looked at your resume." I was so offended. It's like, what do you mean? You're interviewing me and you're not. And then I got into Google and I'm like, holy shit, I know why. You've got a meeting, and then right after that meeting, you've got an interview. When you do the interview, you have to make sure they've not been asked the question before, so that you give them so you've got to have this bank of questions, and you want to make sure that you're focused on them. And so there's only so many things you can focus on. And even if they ran a huge company, it doesn't matter. If they can't show and prove product sense, they're not even going to make it through the front door. And so when I'm grading for that type of an interview, I'm looking for, can you think strategically? Do you identify the people problem? Do you understand, no matter what it is, even if it feels like the world has solved it, it's an interesting problem to solve. Why? Can you think about it from that perspective? The next thing I'm looking for is, are you user focused? You can tell a lot of people who come from marketing or from business who don't have a strong product instinct when their first instinct is, oh, well, we'll improve the ROI of the company. Like, you're a product manager, you're supposed to solve people problems. And so you'll ask, I remember I was recently interviewing somebody who was a product marketing manager, and I thought, okay, this will be really close. But it was very much a business go-to-market mindset, and all his solutions, ideas, and thought processes were in that vein, as opposed to focusing on, what are people problems I can solve? What does a typical user need in any particular space or with a prompt? After they can narrow down to a user, I'm like, I want to see what solutions they come up with. And I'm looking for either extremes. I'm looking for, can you give me an MVP? Can you just, like, if you had to, and you didn't have much of a budget, can you think that way? And on the other, can you think big? Can you come up with something crazy? Or are you so worried about being conservative that you come up with a small solution that's either a modification of the product or snagging an idea from an existing product? If I have time, I want to know, can they measure success? So do they understand product metrics? Do they just throw out acquisition, retention? I'm like, no, how are you going to measure that? What's your funnel look like? How are you going to measure the actions of your users? And so people have to do this and show these things to me in 35 minutes, because that's basically all they've got. First 5 minutes of an interview is, hi, how you doing? Last 5 minutes is, okay, any questions for me?
Wow. That's incredible. So now let's flip that and go more the startup mindset. So you mentioned, hey, that's what it looks like when you're grading on a large scale. So we run something. We actually just had an event called Founders Live. We have these seed stage, if you will, startups that are doing everything in B2B SaaS, B2C SaaS, you name it. All of these, I guess you would call them startup companies. If they're going to go out and they're looking to bring on a product person, their problems that they're solving are different than what Google's solving, right? Like you mentioned, on the scale, they just are not anywhere near Google's scale. So how would you change the interview for them looking to bring on maybe their first product person?
So for startups, it's going to be a combination. The other thing we didn't talk about that I just want to kind of take a step back. The other extreme on the big company and standard product interviews is Amazon with behavioral. And and when someone's being asked, tell me about a situation when X happened, we're looking for good storytelling. Can they give me a quick executive summary? Are they able to talk about, give me context about the product, what they owned, what the problem was they were trying to solve, how they got there, not just them, but with their team, and how do they measure success? And so what was the success they drove? And so you're looking for that. And those stories are usually anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. 7 is usually that sort of happy medium. And can they talk about their experience? Or do they sound like they read an article on how to be a product manager and are keeping it super high level? You'd be surprised at how many people interview that way. And so you have those two. And so when I'm thinking about a startup, I'm bringing both of those. I don't need as an extreme a 35-minute case, but if I ask you, what do you think of the product? I expect Or what do you think of our competitors? I expect some sort of evaluation based on what are they trying to solve? Is their instinct to go to, let me talk about how I help the user. Let me talk about some opportunities to fill a gap in the marketplace because users aren't being served. And it's all focused around, they're not just saying, I listen to users. They're actually in their thought process showing you that they think that way. But I also care about the behavioral, because there's a lot you can learn in a behavioral. And I actually prefer behavioral because I can interview somebody who's straight out of college and ask them a behavioral question and learn a lot about their approach to working, their thought process. And they don't necessarily have to have all the experience. And the less experience they have, the more important just understanding how they handle different situations is much more informative than giving them a prompt that requires a bit of instinct that they have yet to develop, that comes with those case questions.
So what would you say are even like additional mistakes people make, like a common trend that turns into like a really negative result?
Most product managers get into the weeds too quickly, too fast in an interview. They're so used to working with engineers who want them to make sure that they've got all the specs and the requirements, especially if they're at the IC level, so individual contributor level. They have to get into the weeds. They really know their product. They have to be able to explain. It's more important that they be able to communicate to the engineer earlier in their career than anybody else. And so if they haven't had a lot of cross-functional experience, they'll get way too into the details. And so I'm like, as an interviewer, what ends up happening is somebody who goes into the weeds requires them to figure out where they're headed. And so there's a heavy cognitive load on the interviewer to try and figure out. So they start with a story and you're like, where are they going? Is this going to get anywhere anytime soon? So one of the biggest things I coach people who come to me for help for product interviews is, I call it the introduction plus conclusion. It's basically an executive summary. Tell me what you're going to tell me. Tell me the impact you had. Grab my attention. And now I'll listen. I'll give you a little leeway to be a little bit more verbose, but I can follow along. It's not as exhausting for me to follow along as an interviewer if I know where you're headed. I can also redirect you if you give me a summary. I'm like, well, that wasn't quite what I was looking for. Could you give me an experience that's closer to, and give them another scenario. And so it helps make sure that the channels of communication are open. But what happens is people get nervous and they think about the first thing and then they just start running.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, we get that even in our interviews at times. And they get wordy and again get into the weeds. And as an interviewer, I mean, I'm guessing you feel the same way, even though you have maybe a more standard process. You get lost in the story and you don't really care, and you almost get just turned off. Just emotionally, you kind of close your ears to everything they have to say after that. So I like that. How'd you say it? Introclusion? Introclusion. I like that. So when you do you look for someone who's very technical over at, especially, obviously we're talking mostly Google. That's where you're at currently. Do you look for people with a very strong technical skill set?
I'd say it depends on the role and the team. So for example, if I've got a team and they have a super technical PM, actually what I need is somebody on the other extreme. I need someone to complement them. If I have two super technical PMs and a bevy of engineers, they're going to be talking one another's language, and things about that we need to solve for the user are going to get lost. Or they'll have a great idea, but they won't have the skill set to communicate it to other teams or to executives or work with the sales team. And so when you look to hire a PM, you're looking at, as it becomes more of a profession with more formal profession, you're frequently looking to fill gaps on the team. I actually have been the non-technical product manager on a lot of platforms. And I actually bring a lot to the table because I'm not super technical. And I often have a very technical counterpart. But a company has to be at a certain level or have a product leadership that is aware enough about product to bring in a non-technical product manager to a platform. most people who hire for platforms hire for super technical. So I have a bias because I know I'm really good at helping those teams by bringing in that extra. I remember once I was interviewing with one of the companies that's focused on self-driving, and he wanted all my platform experience. He's like, "Oh, you would be great," and he's asking all these technical questions. And I stopped him. I said, "Look, I think I can bring a lot to your team, but you're not ready for me yet because you're looking for a technical PM. And that's not what I do. That's not the value I'm going to bring to the team." It took me forever to get comfortable enough to say that. That was scary the first time I did that. I was like, okay, I know what my strengths are, and knowing what your strengths are can help you get paired up with the right team and choose the right role.
Well, question, like, why was that scary for you as you were like going through roles? Like, why, like showcasing what you're good at or saying what you're not? Like, what was your fear in that?
Usually, typically, when you're looking for a job, you're like, either something's happened and you're bored at your existing job, you have a bad relationship, the product's gone, or the company culture isn't working for you. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why you would go looking for a job. So 90% of the time, you're actually actively looking for a job because you want out. And so somebody's got something interesting. Your first instinct is, how do I sell them? And you're glossing over, well, is this really the right thing for me? Because all you want to do is get out. So being confident enough to say to yourself, you don't want just any job. And if they bring you in, you want them to be fully aware that this is what they're going to get, so that there's no miscommunication on either side. But being confident enough to say it, also confident enough to know what your strengths are. Knowing what your strengths are and being confident to own those is very difficult. It takes a lot of practice interviewing, a lot of self-reflection. I also find asking other people what you're good at. So I periodically will go around to my cross-functional partners and say, so what am I good at? What am I bad at? And they'll often surprise me by pointing out things that are strengths that I was unaware of. And they're like, ooh, I'm going to steal that. I'm going to reuse that. Next interview, I'm going to reuse that.
So question, because I think that's so important, right? Which is like having that comfort level to be able to ask people for advice or ask people or even internally accept it, right? So where were you in your career when you got to the place where that was acceptable for you internally?
I think that the moment I remember it happening was somewhere when I was at Yelp. And I was working for the best product manager, like manager of product managers I've ever had. He was perfect for me. I was a perfect compliment to him. He was I think he probably has a PhD in some sort of crazy science, very analytical. And I'm not as analytical. I'm data driven, but I'm not a scientist. My mother was. Something skipped in the genes. And so he was very thoughtful and I was very more outgoing. I was good at getting teams together and helping people and mentoring. I was a natural coach. And so we complemented each other really well and helped one another. And that helped me become confident in who I was and to understand that my weaknesses could be better complemented by somebody else. And I didn't have to try and do everything myself.
Yeah, I mean, Shane and I talk about his weaknesses all the time. And no, but I think one of the things that Shane, myself, and everyone here embraces is that we're not going to be amazing at every part of everything. And you try to do that in an interview, go, oh, I'm super technical and I'm the least technical person and I'm great at marketing and I'm great at go-to-market and I can do things at scale and I can do things really small. It's like, can you really? Instead, embrace what you're awesome at. And is your, as we call it, your superpower. When we go looking for product people, we ask that question, what is your superpower in product? And embrace that and be open to the fact that maybe I can be analytical, but my superpower is not being analytical. And I think most companies, most interviewers, hiring managers, they're okay with the fact that you have a weakness, an area that's not your greatest strength. That's okay, as long as your greatest strength is a superpower. That's awesome. We'll utilize your superpower, and we have other people on the team who have a superpower in an area where you're not really strong, and that's what makes the team amazing. And I think it does. It takes maturity and confidence to just accept that there is an area that you're not the best at, and that's okay. I don't think anyone gets really mad about that in an interview process, but candidates oftentimes are very scared to say that.
They get mad when they're blindsided. They get mad when you oversell yourself and then you have like gaps that they can uncover during the interview, right? Where it's just like, well, you told me this was something you were strong at, and then they go, let's go 10 layers deep, and you can only go one or two.
Yeah.
But it's understandable because it's a scary question. You're asked to talk about that's one of, as an interview coach, that's one of the things, one of the more frequent questions I get is, how do I handle weakness and failure questions? And you have to be self-aware. You don't want to just, like, somebody who's super junior will go, oh, I work really, really hard. I'm like, no, that's not your weakness. And you're going to sound really trite, and you're probably, you're going to fail that interview question 100%. And you may cause you to fail the interview because you're not showing that you're self-aware. And so what I've started to do is coach people to understand. I start with, so what are your 3 strengths? So what are you working on to improve yourself? Now let's double click on that one. Your weaknesses are in those things that you have self-identified and you're already working on. So if when you go into an interview to talk about your weaknesses, identifying what you have already started working on yourself and being self-aware with your interviewer and telling them that's a home run. And they're like, okay, great. He's good at this and self-aware enough, and I can work with this. I can coach on this. But that's super hard. If you don't have someone to tell you that, your first instinct is, I need to pick something that's not too offensive, that's not a real weakness for my job. And so then they give these super fluffy weaknesses that don't help you or the interviewer.
Yeah, that's a good point. So in product in general, do you see a trend or a challenge in product that needs to be overcome?
Product is so vast. I think if we were going to take it into a trend that I see happening in people trying to get into product, because I kind of circling back to, I think, your original question. When I started in product, everyone was getting there by accident. Some people came from engineering. A lot of really good product managers actually came from the arts. So history majors, communication majors. Now it's become much more of a profession. You've got product school, you've got Reforge, you've got all these training programs. And so it's actually becoming more competitive, and it's harder for people who got in by accident to get in now because everything has become so competitive. And so if you're trying to get in with very few skills, you often have to go to a startup. But right now, startups are going for, well, we need somebody who's a little bit more senior, who's got the skill set so we can go and wants that big bet. And everyone has dollar signs in their mind when they think of startups.
Yep.
And so I think the biggest problem is we need product managers, and how do we get a better standardized way of helping people break in?
I actually have argued, I think there's going to soon, and sooner rather than later, start to become disciplines at the university level where you can major in electrical engineering, you can major in business finance, and you can major in product. Probably in the business school, it would be product marketing. In the engineering school, it might be technical product design or product management or whatever. And there will be just straight up majors revolving around product in the software space that we haven't seen, that doesn't exist right now, at least to my knowledge, as we start to build more of a platform for it.
Yeah, I think there may be a handful of universities that are doing it, but it's not mainstream everywhere.
Yeah. All right, so here's the portion of the show you get to brag or publicize or whatever. So we have Google. Why would it be exciting for someone to be a product manager at Google?
Well, Google, it's all reputation, I would say. I mean, anybody who's worked at Google, there's a couple things going on. One, if you read the stats, it's like fewer people get into Google than get into Stanford, and Stanford has an acceptance rate of low single 2%. Digits. Yeah. So once you get into Google, the rest of the world knows that you had enough product sense and design sense, and you're smart and you have enough acumen in order to get into Google. So that's the first obvious one. The second, for a lot of people, and for me, there's so many consumer products. And for the vast majority of product managers, having some sort of consumer experience in your background is crucial. It's also easier to understand. We're all consumers. So if you get to be a product manager and a consumer, you can empathize with them immediately, as opposed to when you do B2B products, you have to really know your industry.
Yeah.
And so it's really attractive to be like, you can put me on any product and I probably will somewhat understand the user.
That's awesome. Now, again, a lot of times when we get to ask that question, we're talking to someone whose company is more in the startup phase, or, you know, they're growing, but they're certainly not Google. There are many, right? It's Google, Amazon, Facebook, and a couple others, Netflix, whatever. So to say it, obviously, to have the Google name behind you means pretty special person. So certainly, obviously, you've done a fantastic job, but it's cool to work at a place like Google because of the consumer experience that you get. I mean, again, you started off by saying it as I work on the ad product that essentially everyone in the world touches at some point, basically every single day too. It's not even like once a year you might stumble across this. It's like pretty much every day. Like when Shane and I wanted to get food today, we pulled up Google and we're like, what restaurants are near us? Like, I mean, that's what we do all day, every day. And you're a part of touching it. And that's a pretty big, pretty awesome thing.
Yeah, and I even think, like, my family, they brag about the fact that I worked at Facebook more than probably any other job that I've ever had or any other company I've ran or owned. And, like, I run my own company, but you worked at Facebook once. It's like, all right, guys.
Next level is definitely cooler than Facebook. I'm just saying. All right, so last question, unless you had any other good ones. I have a really, really important one also. All of us are constantly wondering, we're just trying to figure out, it consumes our day, the answer to this. Tonight when we all go home and we're like, what should we watch on TV? What is it? What is the series that we have to, what are you watching right now on Netflix or Hulu or whatever? What is the series that we got to check out?
You picked a bad question for me, given that I'm renovating my kitchen right now, so I'm not watching all those movies. But my friend suggested, and I started 2 days ago, Midnight Mass. It's on Netflix. I'm still getting into it.
It's on the docket of something I'm supposed to watch in the next week. Yep.
Yeah.
Stephanie has convinced me that we have to watch it.
What is this about?
I'm not 100% positive.
What is it about?
I'm still figuring it out. It's a small little island, and they've got sometimes it almost feels like it's got some horror thing that I'm waiting to come out, but it's not.
Okay, it hasn't come yet, but it's like,
yeah, and it's like in-depth character studies. It starts with a guy basically getting into a car accident because he's drunk and killing a young woman, and so one of the main characters is going through that. He got out of jail 4 years after it, and how family and community deal with it. He goes into a community that's been devastated by an oil spill. There's one church in town, so there's definitely, the church is very involved in things, and there's something about the father there that's a little, I haven't quite figured everything out. Like literally I'm on like episode, like the first half of the second episode or something. So
all right, Midnight Mass. I would say there's a new season soon to come to Amazon Prime of Hannah, and Hannah was really interesting. That was a very good show that I did not expect to be as good as it was. So Hannah is really interesting. So there's my suggestion of the month. So check out Hannah. Well, again, Wendy-Lynn McClean, I thank you, McClean. I thank you so much for having us, for coming on to our wonderful, very, very well watched podcast. This has been awesome chatting with you about product. Hearing the stories of how people get into product from working in wine to now all of a sudden product over at Google is certainly, like you said, not the typical path that people take, but it is awesome to hear all the different routes people take to get there. You've made an amazing career out of it, and I just appreciate everything you've said and all of the stuff that hopefully is helping the people who listen to this, who want to get into product, go, wow, that was really insightful to learn about how to communicate my failures or my weaknesses. So totally appreciate you coming on.
all right, thank you very much. I've enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, and everyone, thank you for checking us out, and go like this video on YouTube, and go check out Wendy-Lynn on LinkedIn and connect with her, and we will talk to you guys in probably 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Next in.